All right, this week we're going to talk about light and photosynthesis. This is not a talk on what photosynthesis is in terms of its equation and how it works in the plant, those sorts of things, because as land managers, we don't necessarily need to memorize the equation for photosynthesis to be able to manipulate characteristics in the plant or in our growing conditions to maximize what we're trying to do. All right, so these three things, the quantity of light or its intensity, which deals directly with photosynthesis, the quality of light, which plants use to do things other than photosynthesis, which we call photomorphogenesis, and the duration of light, which deals with photoperiodism. In other words, the length of light in the summer is different than the length of light in the fall, right? Plants are reading that as well. So the quantity, quality, and duration of light are all things that plants can keep track of. What we are looking for is productivity. Productivity means the accumulation of, well, we would measure it in dry matter, but the accumulation of matter. Growth, in other words. So if you're a corn grower, you want your corn to grow big and tall and produce ears. If you are a petunia grower, you want those petunias to fill in and produce a lot of flowers. If you are a golf course manager, you need that grass to fill in very, very thick and very dense. So productivity means different things to different people, but basically what we're looking for is photosynthesis adds to it, and respiration and photorespiration, in other words, what happens in the dark, subtracts from that. So we need photosynthesis to be as efficient as possible so we can get as much productivity as we possibly can out of our plants. Some of this seems complicated at first, but what we're looking at is as photosynthesis starts ramping up, as light goes up, our photosynthetic rate goes up, and then at some point, it doesn't matter how much more light we have, what becomes limiting is carbon dioxide and not the amount of light. All right, and no more light, you don't get a whole lot more photosynthetic productivity than you would here. So this point right here is where we're trying to shoot for, because that's going to be the maximum photosynthetic productivity for the light that we're applying. Now, you outdoor growers, you're not really changing the volume of light that you get. You indoor growers can add lights, add length of lights, add different lights that would allow things to change. What we're looking at here is going to be, is it really important that one individual leaf photosynthesize at its maximum capacity, or that we get as many leaves as possible photosynthesizing as best as they possibly can? And that's actually what we're going to be trying to do. So the size of the boxes here relates to how important they are toward productivity. So these things over here on the right, these are all things that detract from plant growth. All of the other processes that are not involved in making sugars, basically. So what we look at here is one individual leaf photosynthesizing really, really well does not contribute to productivity very well. But the entire canopy photosynthesizing really well is what you want. Not every leaf photosynthesizing as best as it possibly can, but the entire canopy photosynthesizing as best as it possibly can. This should be pretty obvious. The more light that plants are able to intercept, the more their growth rate is. So crop growth, CGR stands for crop growth rate. And this is in soybeans. And again, that's pretty obvious. The more light they get, the better they grow. This is total light in a day. And again, this looks like it's a really complicated graph, but it's not all that complicated. It's pretty obvious. In the middle of the day at 3 o'clock, we're going to get more light than we are at 6 o'clock. And the different lines are for different months. So the blue is June, the red is June, but it's a cloudy day. The black is December on a clear day, and the green is December on a cloudy day. And that's pretty obvious. You go outside when it's cloudy, and you're just not getting as much light. So some of this is kind of, well, duh, sort of information, but it's shown out in a graph. So again, we want as much of our canopy photosynthesizing as best as we possibly can by getting as much total available light as we possibly can. Again, the more light available, the more light the plants can use. Most of these things are things that we cannot control. We cannot control the clouds. We can't control the time of day, the time of year. I suppose we could control our latitude simply by moving to a different latitude, but that doesn't seem to be the most practical of things. Same thing. All right, this is going to concentrate on the time of year. This is the same basic thing. Plants are responding to the total amount of light that they're getting, in addition to the instantaneous amount. They're measuring all of these sorts of things. Again, this is kind of obvious. If we're going to assume that the most amount of light we can get in any given year is in July, then in August we have a little bit less, September's a little bit less, October, November, December, all of these are each a little bit less. And then as we move through and go again toward the summer months, we're getting more and more and more and more. Duh. There's more light in the summer than there is in the wintertime. These are things here that we can start to control. The leaf area index, in other words, how big the leaf is, and the shoot structure, the leaf angle, the internode length, and in particular, plant arrangement. So we may not be able to control, especially outside, the amount of light we get, but we can breed for bigger leaves, smaller leaves, leaves that are upright, leaves that are flat, etc., and we can grow those types of plants differently in our fields and in our greenhouses. This is leaf area index, LAI, in other words, the size of the leaf, and crop productivity. Look closely. As the leaf gets larger, it gets more light, so it's intercepting more of the solar radiation. But at some point, a larger leaf doesn't really help a whole lot. And that's the thing. A larger leaf doesn't necessarily help a whole lot. So breeding for this size leaf and this size leaf is not going to increase productivity a whole lot. And that's why people do these sorts of studies, because there's no point in breeding for a bigger soybean leaf if the soybean leaf size currently right now gives us the best productivity. All right, canopy architecture and light absorption. These again are things that we can control. The leaf angle, the internode length, and the plant arrangement. So again, the size of the boxes are going to be important here, so this leaf angle becomes one of the most important things that we can deal with. Look at how these two plants hold their leaves. Sunflowers tend to hold their leaves flat, and notice the arrangement. So they're trying not to shade as few leaves as possible. They're kind of orienting their plant's world around the stem a little bit so that no one leaf is shading too much of other leaves. Grasses have a completely different way of doing things. They tend to have very long, narrow leaves that they hold them upright. So that orientation of the leaf becomes the big thing. This is just the light. The blue lines represent the light coming through. So a leaf that's flat is going to absorb a lot of light individually, but it's not going to allow light to penetrate through to the canopy. So lower leaves are not going to get as much light. And this is kind of the same thing. The canopy of horizontally oriented leaves, most of the light is intercepted in the top half of the canopy. So these are leaves that are held flat. And you can see these leaves down here, all of these leaves are not adding to productivity, but the plant still has to care for those leaves. So we'd like to get as many leaves as possible adding to productivity. You orient your leaves a little bit more vertically, a lot more light comes through, and even here we've got a leaf that's adding to, maybe not a whole lot. Unlike here and here, we've only got a couple leaves now that are not adding to general productivity. Something else that we can breed for is the internode length, meaning the length of the stem between individual leaves. So here, same picture, right? Flattened leaves, internodes fairly close together. In other words, leaves spaced fairly close together. We space them further apart. We breed for a taller plant, and a lot more light penetrates, and we have fewer leaves that are not contributing to the productivity of the plant. Finally, this is something that we work with a lot. Think about those of you who are agronomic growers, how close we plant corn plants now compared to 100 years ago, or in the 1950s and 60s. How close are they planted right now? Those of you who are greenhouse growers, you can space plants a certain distance in the greenhouse to take advantage of as much space as you can get in your greenhouse. Because if you can get an extra 10 plants in your greenhouse, you're going to make more money that way. So what we want to do is we want to space plants so that we maximize the space without interfering in each other. So on the left, they're spaced too far apart. Each plant photosynthesizing to its best, but we could get more plants in the greenhouse. On the right, spaced too close together. We got many, many plants in the greenhouse, but lots of them aren't going to look as well. So if we increase our leaf angle, we can get more plants in our greenhouse, if possible. Now, we're not going to take begonias and make them have grass-like leaves. But we can breed for certain characteristics to ensure that we're taking advantage of the best way to pack these plants. So if we're able to breed plants that have a slightly increased leaf angle, we can get more plants into that same area. Whether this is a field or a greenhouse, we can get more plants into that area. More plants, more productivity, more money in your pocket. This works landscape situations as well. We pack close plants too close and they start shading each other, and that starts causing interference. We want to not reduce photosynthesis that much. So again, what we are is that red plant is not getting a lot of photosynthesis because it's being shaded out too much by its neighbors. Vertical leaf angle is going to eliminate shading by your neighbors, although it doesn't necessarily limit self-shading. Plants are going to do that on their own way, however, by organizing their leaves in different directions. But that means maybe we can get another row in the field, or a couple more plants in the garden, or a few more plants in the greenhouse. And that's what we're looking for. So again, this is kind of showing you, stretch out that internode length, you get more light to more leaves, and suddenly you get more productivity. So more efficient use of absorbed light means that everybody photosynthesizes at their maximum rate. And that's what particularly those of you who are growing in greenhouses and food production are looking for. Last few slides are just some pictures. So this is a sunflower field, obviously, and this is pretty much at ground level. And you can see how closely packed the plants appear to be. But if we go overhead, this is a sunflower field from overhead. They're not packed nearly as tightly as you think, because those are big plants that hold their leaves horizontally. Let's do the same thing with the cornfield. So you can see how corn holds its leaves very, very differently. So this is a cornfield at eye level, and this is a cornfield from a drone. You can see how much denser these plants are. They're much more tightly packed together. Perennial growers are going to grow things more like our sunflower farms, where there's going to be a lot more space, because maximizing productivity is getting as many flowers on there as you possibly can. So even perennial growers need to think of these sorts of things. And if you don't think breeders haven't thought about these sorts of things, this is a wild tulip. Look at the leaves of this wild tulip. Tulips growing in the wild have their leaves held out horizontally because they don't have that many leaves. So if they hold them horizontally, they can catch as much sunlight as they possibly can. These are tulips growing in a greenhouse. So these are hybrid tulips growing in a greenhouse. Look at their leaves. Those leaves have all been bred to be upright. Why? Because now we let more light through the canopy and we can pack more plants into our greenhouse because we're getting the same productivity as the wild type is with its flattened leaves. So the things that we can control here are leaf area index, in other words, how big the leaf is. We can control spacing. We can breed for different leaf arrangements, meaning are the leaves held flat or more upright. And we can breed for longer and longer stems, meaning taller plants to let more light through. So we can't necessarily easily control the amount of light. You can a little bit in a greenhouse. But we can control other parts of the plant, and that's where most of the breeding has been done. As always, if you have questions, do not hesitate to get in touch.